Now that we've covered effects, we must also talk about their impact on real-time playback performance, because this can be quite a problem when we're editing. If we apply lots of different effects to a clip, and it doesn't quite matter what they are, let's just say for argument's sake we're applying lots of different effects, there's a chance that we won't end up with real-time playback. I will on this machine because it's extremely high spec. But if you're working with H.264 files, or you're working with another codec which is difficult to decode, you just have to be very careful with applying effects like this because it can slow you down. Now, we can cache these things, or we could use a new feature in Resolve 17, which is the Render in Place option. Now, I know this is the Cut Panel module, but we need to take a quick detour into the Edit panel for this to work. So I'm just going to click over to Edit. Our entire edit is there and completely intact. And for argument's sake, I'm going to say that this clip is not giving me real-time playback. I need to select the clip or clips, multiple, which are giving me playback issues. And I need to right-click one of them. And I can choose Render in Place. Now, this typically comes later in the edit when we begin to apply different effects to the clip, because it comes with some pretty big limitations as well. Render in Place is basically an easier and more versatile version of caching a clip to render cache. And we've not talked about render caching in terms of the edit so far because we haven't needed it yet. We will talk about that later. I just want to talk about render in place for now because it's bound to be the more popular option going forwards. Render in Place essentially exports a copy of these clips with all effects rendered in or baked into them, and then replaces the clips on the timeline with the new rendered copies. That way the clips don't have to be worked out by Resolve, it just reads the file that it's just generated. There are plus points and minus points to doing this. Basically, during the edit it makes things much faster. We then want to switch back to our original media before we export, because it's always a bad idea to have multiple exports of the same material in the pipeline, because no matter what we lose something when exporting, so we try to have the smallest number of exports possible. I'm going to go ahead and click Render in Place here, and it's going to ask me, how should I render these clips out? Should it be a QuickTime? Should it be a DPX? Should it be a TIF? I'm going to say QuickTime. Now, I'm on Windows, so I cannot export ProRes from DaVinci Resolve. For me, DNX HD 1080p 185 is enough. And I'm going to check Include Video Effects here. That means any of the video effects I've applied are kind of rendered into the footage, and Resolve doesn't have to work out what they are anymore, because working out those effects are what is going to cost us playback performance. I also have the option to include handles, and we actually might want to do this. Handles are essentially additional media. If I have 15 frame handles, I am rendering my clip out as it shows up on the timeline, but I'm also rendering 15 frames before the in point and 15 frames after the out point. The more you work in editing, the more you deal with especially VFX and color pipelines, you're going to be hearing the term handles a lot. Standard practice is half-second handles, so that's typically 12 or 13 frame handles. I'm going to say 13 frames here. And then I will hit render. Now, every time I do this, Resolve asks me, where should I render these clips out to? This is not a project-wide setting that we choose. We do it every time we use Render in Place. And that might sound like it's a bit of a pain, but the thing about Render in Place is we only do it where we're losing performance. This isn't something we're meant to be doing for every clip. We do it as an easier and kind of more usable way of handling effects within an edit. So I've got in my Scratch an RIP, which is Render in Place folder, and I'm just going to render them out there. Once I choose that, it goes ahead and it renders that footage out. Now, we'll see the thumbnail updates with the effects because all of those effects have been rendered in, and it will play in real time this time. It did before, but you just have to use your imagination here because it takes a lot to slow my workstation down, I'm afraid. That's very rarely a bad thing. When we look at these new clips, they will be placed in the bin that we had open at the time we chose the render, and we will see them with the file name and render1 afterwards, because these are actually new files. They are not the original media. And to really hammer that home, I can't extend these beyond the handles. This is not the full rush, it's just what I had down on the timeline at the point at which I chose to render it out, plus whatever handles I stipulated, that's all. This is not the whole rush. So don't think that you can do this to every single clip. You have to pick the appropriate time to do this. So the only real reason I would ever use render in place is if I had an edit with a lot of effects and it was slowing me down, or if I knew I had to take this edit to a laptop at some point and the laptop wasn't as big as my desktop workstation. I might do this beforehand, and then when I archive the project it all gets sent along as well. Because what we can do is we can find these clips in our actual storage, and we can transfer these, we can put them on a drive and send them along. We can send these to any other user very easily because they're just video files. It's not like a cache file which you have to redo on each machine, or you have to be very careful about copying and pasting different folders around. We can just send these files to someone else. So if I know that I'm going to have to go on the move with this edit and I've got a laptop or a MacBook, I can render these out first, and I know that I'm not going to trip over this later on. There are uses for this. They're pretty situational and pretty much to do with effects and playback, but it can be a useful feature to be aware of. Now, the last thing I want to be able to do is I want to be able to go back to my original rush. And I do that by selecting this media down here, right-clicking, and underneath render in place, I now have a new option, decompose to original. If I click this, then I don't delete the rendered files, they are still there, but I go back to the original rush and the effects are applied once again. This will slow us down again if this was the problem. But before we do our final export, or for me, preferably before we try and conform on another machine, I like to get rid of all of these rendered in place files and make sure that everything is linked to the actual proxies before I hand this over to effects or color, or before I render out directly from this timeline. So that's an important step. Render in place, but then also decompose to original once you're done and you want to export, because what we don't want to do is export the same footage or compress the same footage multiple times in the same pipeline. That's always a big no-no. We want a workflow with the smallest number of color transforms and the smallest number of instances of compression that we can manage. So we always go back to the original footage before we export this timeline. So that's essentially how the render in place works. It's a new feature in Resolve 17. If you find yourself not using it, don't worry, you're not doing anything wrong. It's really only for when effects begin to slow you down as an editor, that's all. So, click on through to the next